All right, I am back here talking about what's been a very busy Mets offseason prior to the lockout. Joining me today is one of the creators of the Just Mets blog. He's worked on Mets blog in the past. Michael Barron is here. Michael, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. I'm glad to have you on. I got to say, this year has been such a weird year for the Mets. And I know before we get to all the fun stuff, I want to sort of go back, look at the start at the whole 2021 year as a whole. So, like, if you could sort of sum up, like, what your take was on that whole disastrous season, what would you say it is?
um, Look, I mean, it started off on the wrong foot with the can't even keep track of it anymore. The Jared Porter GM situation, the grossly inappropriate behavior on his part, which came to light. Um, I mean, you look back on the season and it started off so promising, and I don't want to say it erased that negativity and that black cloud that was kind of over the team at that point, but it certainly made you forget about it a little bit, at least through at least into early August anyway. But there things got bad quickly with the club, and I always I circled the day before the All-Star break on the calendar when the Mets had a 5-0 lead against the Pirates, blew it and lost. That sort of set the tone for the second half. Obviously, the situation with Zach Scott was obviously not predictable, um, but the optics were certainly bad. With respect to the Jared Porter situation, with respect to their, I don't want to say their failed recruitment of Trevor Bauer, but certainly their willingness to ignore his past behavior. And thankfully that didn't work out for them. But and certainly Max Scherzer probably wouldn't be here if it had. But it was a roller coaster of a year for them, ending in very disappointing fashion. It was one of the most disappointing years I can remember. Watching the team, covering the team, talking about the team, just because the expectations were so high. And while they weren't necessarily playing particularly well through July, nonetheless they were in first place with a healthy lead. Before obviously going to California, playing the California teams and getting their asses handed to them. For that they lost 11-12, and that pretty much ended their season right there. But the writing was on the wall by then too. You could tell like they were deeply flawed. They didn't handle the trade deadline well, in my opinion. I mean, I'm kind of glad they got Javi Baez, and he certainly toed his weight. But they knew there was something up with Jacob deGrom's forearm. They kept downplaying it and didn't address that, or get insurance or adequate insurance at the trade deadline. And that cost them as well, because their pitching tanked in the second half. Taijuan Walker was a shadow of himself, a shadow of the all-star pitcher he was in the first half. In the second half, although his September was certainly encouraging. Francisco Lindor struggled for most of the year after signing that big deal, although again his second half was encouraging. And then here we are in the offseason, after a really bad finish, like a really, really bad second half. They lost 85 games, right? They have, their offseason to date has been a slam dunk, right? I mean, how can anyone be disappointed with getting the best pitcher available, the best center fielder available? What's the common denominator there? Strength up the middle, right? Yeah, they struck out. I wouldn't say they struck out. They couldn't retain Javier Baez. They couldn't, they were obviously unable to retain Noah Syndergaard, but there are a lot of good things. To date, they definitely have a better roster today than they did before. That flurry of signings, 2 weeks ago, their Black Friday shopping spree, as I like to put it. And they've been engaged. They were heavily engaged with Javier Baez right to the end. They just couldn't make the contract parameters work. Detroit offered him, I would say, I don't want to say more of a guarantee, but a steadier salary for from what I understand. So I think he just, and he took, he's going to get to play shortstop there too. He would, while he would have gotten to play next to Francisco Lindor, and something I think he would have really rather liked to do over the long term. I think, the dollars and cents just made more sense to him in Detroit. So, there's certainly been some ups and downs. It would have been nice to have Javier Baez back, but that I don't think this closes the door on, Scherzer signing anyway, closes the door on someone like Chris Bryant, when and if this lockout ends. So, and I personally, I believe, the offseason is going to be just as exciting when this lockout ends, because it's going to end close to spring training. Players are going to want to sign, and you're going to see boom, 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 boom signings again. And that's great. That was great for the sport. Just with the lockout looming, it was bittersweet, if you will. But it's been a great winter for them. I mean, you don't win championships in December, but you have to like the roster as it stands today, with certainly more improvements to come, assuming this lockout ends.
Yeah, assuming it ends at some point, but I want to start. I kind of got an order here. The moves are happy. I start with them finally landing on Billy Eppler as the GM. I mean, I don't want to revisit the whole surge, which took on a life of its own, and some things probably not accurate there to others. But what do you think about the choice they made here, landing Eppler as the new GM of the team?
I never know what to think of these things, right? I mean, he's you got to love what he did with the Yankees, and building, their analytics department over those many years he was with the organization. He moved up the ranks there. He's a likable, energetic GM. He is a future-proof GM, in my opinion. But I also think he's a safer pick. And for the Mets, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think they went with some, the behavior aside, I think they went with some unknowns, with Porter and Zach Scott. That's not to say they didn't have strong reputations. They did. But, Eppler, obviously has GM experience. He has assistant GM experience working with the Yankees. He's had success with the Yankees. He's had success in New York. And, I think there are reasons he didn't succeed in Anaheim. The owner might have a lot to do with that. It's one of those things. I armchair manage. I'm Monday morning quarterback. It's like a talk to me in a year kind of thing. I mean, I like what he's done. I like the strategy, and I like a lot of the things he's saying. He's analytically driven. He uses the word probability and probabilistic a lot, which is an analytic thought process. And in order for professional sports organizations to be competitive, you need that kind of mind. I mean, obviously Eppler wasn't their first choice. They wanted to hire a president first and let the president hire the GM. So, I'd be lying if I said, this is the choice they dreamed of. I mean, obviously he wasn't. And, the way they got to them, it obviously wasn't the way they envisioned it. But I don't think he's, I'm not going to say he's bad. I mean, I think he's, he may not have been the popular or sexy choice, but that doesn't mean he's the wrong choice. And so, I'm better. It's easier to judge when, the popcorn trail's been laid behind him, so let's just see what happens. I was lukewarm about it before. I like a lot of the things he said, but I like a lot of the things GMs say, like they're salesmen. So, it's a difficult question for me to answer, because I like his track record, minus Anaheim, but I think there are reasons why why he struggled in Anaheim. There are pros and cons, but I think that goes with any candidate. I think even if they had been able to hire, Theo Epstein as the president, I think there are pros and cons there too. I don't think he may have been the best, the best. That might have proven to be the best paths, but that doesn't mean he's perfect. He has a track record. It doesn't mean it would translate with the Mets. It doesn't mean it would translate in New York. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't dislike the pick, if that helps.
That makes sense, because sort of like he sounds good on paper, but we have to see him actually perform with the moves and the choices he's making.
Yeah, and that goes for anybody. And I'm not going to sit here and say, I was excited with any of them. Like I'm like I think there are right and wrong moves. I think there are good and bad paths. But I like when Theo Epstein's was named as a top choice and it was reported he spoke with Steve Cohen. I wasn't excited or not excited. It was I'm kind of numb to it. I mean, I know he might have been the best fit for what they were trying to do, but time will always tell with these things, and that's really all I can say. He's had a great off season. He's been a bull in a china shop. He's checked every single box and then some to date. There's still work to do. This was an 85 loss team. But I think he's on the right path, and that's all you want out of a GM. You want your GM, you want your owner to be, at the high rollers table and in a position to win the hands. And so far so good. He's had an awesome 3 weeks. I don't think anyone can dispute that.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I mean, we'll start with the Black Friday shopping, you like to call it here, the big three free agent pickups here with Kana, Escobar, and Marte. And I loved all three of them because I think they add different dimensions to that offense. You see guys who make contact, guys who don't strike out a lot, guys performing the clutch, add some speed and defense to this group. I think it was a much needed sort of change to how the group had been constructed over the last few years.
Yeah, and I agree. I think they needed to. There are a lot of things they needed to address. Number one, they needed to address their balance. Their left to right balance, right? And they've done that. They got Marte, who does that. They got Canna, who does that. They have Escobar, who he's a switch hitter, I believe, right? So he helps them strike that balance as well. So that's number one. Number two, to your point, Marte, great contact guy. He's got that, but I think the one of the great things he brings, one of the biggest and under discussed things he brings to the table, number one is defense. Although I don't know how long he's going to be able to stay in center field, but again, strength up the middle. We talked about that before. Very important. Number two, culturally, these three guys, Billy Eppler's talked a lot about the culture and the culture needing to change. When you see, Marcus Stroman walking out of press conferences, when you see and hear Pete Alonso in the midst of a spiral with their season getting out of control, him saying, "Don't worry, it's all going to be fine." It's this blind positivity, this toxic positivity, as my colleague Rich McLeod termed it over the summer, that which needed to be changed. Because if you just keep saying, quote unquote, trust the process, everything's going to be fine, and it doesn't, and things aren't fine, that means your process stinks. It means your culture stinks. It means your thought process stinks. So, I think Billy Eppler, at least with their reputations being strong clubhouse characters, has checked has checked the boxes just with those three hitters alone, not to mention Max Scherzer, who we all know is just a winner, right? I mean, everywhere he goes, he wins. So, but also with Marte specifically, again, it's under discussed, but his base running skills, and I'm not talking about stolen bases. Yeah, he led the league in stolen bases last year, but he's one of the better base runners in the game. And to say the Mets have been a consistently poor base running team, it would be understating, the problem. So I think he helps. His presence goes a long way towards helping to solve that problem. They need to get better. They need to be better first to third. They need to be less station to station. I think a little bit better coaching in the third base box would help too, but I don't know that was the root of their problems. I mean, how many times did Jonathan VR get either picked off or thrown out stealing last year? And when you every time you lose an out on the bases, you lose a run scoring opportunity. The fewer runners you have on, the less runs you're going to score. It's really that simple. So that's not to say Marte won't get picked off or thrown out stealing, but again, the track record says that he improves that situation a lot for them. And so, it's more than just, statistics, doubles, home runs, RBIs. It's okay. Well, how is he actually generating those RBIs? How is he actually generating the runs he scores and the runs he's producing. So um, I think that's a very, very important thing, and run prevention too. Run production can be defined, to me anyway, can be defined by the number of runs you help prevent, right? Especially if the team is struggling to score runs, which how many years have the Mets been? Well, generally speaking, how Mets always seem to struggle to score runs. So when you're struggling to score runs, you need to be very, very good in the run prevention department. Marte definitely helps them there as well.
Yeah, I also, before we get to the Scherzer thing, which is probably the headline move here, I want to get to the point you brought up about the clubhouse culture here, which you mentioned as Rich put it, the toxic positivity, how they seem to be living in Candyland, as I called it on my podcast, where they were just everything was sunshine and roses. And
Yep.
I think it's telling that, like, besides the fact they brought in all these guys with big reputations, that they have not rushed to bring back any of their own guys. I mean, they had the Q out on Syndergaard. They had a price to appoint them at Baez, showed no interest in Stroman. I think that also sees you that they realize that they are a problem at the fix.
Well, I mean, I don't think you're too far off there. They, with Syndergaard and Conforto specifically, I don't necessarily view them as the problem in the clubhouse. They may not be the natural leader you maybe expected him to be over time. Conforto, prior to this year, is an outstanding player. Like he may not be a superstar, but he's a great complementary player for any lineup. And I think he's going to be fine wherever he lands. I think, the decision to move away from Conforto is more about striking the lineup balance and becoming more contact centric. Conforto is very streaky, and when he's in a cold spell, he seemingly strikes out more times than he comes up to the plate. So I don't think moving on from there has a lot to do with the culture. Syndergaard, remember, wasn't around a lot over the last year, really the last 2 years. So I think that's more about. I think the Syndergaard thing was something they were disappointed about. It's clear they're moving forward in a different direction with the guys they've gotten to replace Conforto's presence in the lineup. When it comes to Marcus Stroman, I mean, look, he's a Long Island guy. He's a guy, I believe, even when he first arrived, wanted to remain with the Mets or in New York long term. But just if you just look at what he did on Twitter, over the last month, taking his negotiations public, saying the things he was saying, the liking the comment about Tony DeComo's background is which was racially targeted, to say the least, probably didn't help his cause very much. Which speaks to which gets us back to his behavior with the media in general last summer. And I just, look, this isn't me, revealing anything. He walked out on a press conference when he got a question he didn't like, and if you're going to play in New York, if you're going to play in any major media market, you can't do that. You don't have to like the people in the media. You don't have to like talking to the media, but the team expects players to get in front of the microphone, especially pitchers after their outing, whether it's good or not. And the players who fit the profile, the New York profile, are probably the best at that. And when they have a bad day, they own the outing. When they have a good day, they know how to, how to spread the credit around. It's disappointing and surprising that he handled the media the way he did. And this isn't, meant to disparage him. I mean, I think he's a great pitcher, and I'm disappointed he's not going to be a Met. I think he makes the Mets better. I think he makes any team better. But, the Mets, like you said, have to change the culture. And this isn't, these aren't revealing things, with Stroman. I mean, his Twitter behavior is in public. His behavior, in press conferences, that was in public. This isn't, so I would expect the Mets were turned off by that. Um, and obviously, he was a very strong personality and presence. He's a very effervescent person when things are going well. He's a guy you want quotes and sound bites from. Um, but when things started to go badly, there were some very concerning things that he did and said, and which disappointed me as a baseball fan. It's not to say that his behavior was the root of some of the other things that went down, i.e., the thumbs down thing. Pete Alonso's meandering comments when the club was starting to lose back in July and August. But it's certainly a similar symptom to what was clearly a big problem that Billy Eppler and Sandy Alderson are endeavoring to change and have perhaps achieved. Um, Again, it's not meant to disparage Marcus Stroman. I was a proponent of him coming back. I was a proponent of him being extended last winter. Um, but something happened, obviously, and here we are. He's a Chicago Cub, and I hope he does well. I hope he, doesn't take these Twitter shenanigans end for him, and because that's going to be important for his success there. Chicago can be very difficult to play in when the team stinks too. So that's I think he shot himself in the foot. Long story short.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a slight to any of the guys individually. It's sort of more like when the team underachieves as it did for the last 3 years. That's why I have 6 weeks in 2019. Like, you got to change some stuff up, and bring Scherzer in here, I think, is a big step in that direction. Because obviously, big presence top of the rotation. On the field, we know how good he is, but I think also the comparison I'm making here, sort of like the move when they brought Pedro in 05, when yes, the contract probably a little too long, yes, a little too much money, but like sort of changed the perception to other players, saying, hey, like, the Mets will be in on big guys. Come to the Mets. You can win here, have fun here. I think that's sort of the whole like transition change here. Like, what do you think the impact Scherzer brings besides the on-field stuff?
Well, I mean, obviously, he has he has that. You could see it every time he pitched against the Mets. This bulldog, this bulldog mentality he has, and it's something I think. Um, since David Wright left, they've kind of lacked that literal and figurative leader in the clubhouse and on the field, that inspirational leader, which anyone can follow and be in awe of, right? I mean, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. To say he lived up to his contract in Washington probably understates how magnificent he was with Washington. And, for that matter, with the Dodgers last year, towards the end of the year, he was fantastic last year. And he's a guy who leads by example. He's a guy who, you can see that energy, you can see that determination, and that can only rub off positively on any player of any age in that clubhouse. And, I think that's part of what Steve Cohen is buying here. That's part of the asset he procured. He's trying to steer that dugout. He's trying to steer that clubhouse in a direction that only knows winning. It's like the Mets way, the winning Mets way. And you do that with winning people. And sometimes those people are expensive, but I think, they realize that the contract may not end well from a performance perspective, but you're never going to change the attitude and the philosophy that Max Scherzer has. And like you said, it's akin to when they brought Pedro Martinez in back in 2005. You knew this wasn't the Pedro Martinez of the late 90s, but they needed to make the Mets a destination. They needed to make the Mets better, obviously, which he did. And I think Max Scherzer does that well. And if you pair him with a healthy Jacob deGrom, right? What better 1-2 punch is there in Major League Baseball? What better 1-2 punch? I can't think of. I mean, since Scherzer and Verlander in Detroit, and those teams went very far, in the postseason. So, You're talking about one of the best 1-2 punches in the last 15 years if they're both healthy, and and that's just from a baseball perspective. But the intangibles, like you said, I think they're hard to quantify. But certainly, he's going to transform the attitude and the behaviors of a lot of those people in the clubhouse for sure. Even those whose heads were screwed on straight. He's going to make he's going to make those joints even tighter, which is all you can want or expect.
Yeah, you mentioned the combos here. One that came to mind to me was sort of the Randy Johnson, Kurt Schilling dynamic in
Yeah.
Arizona, and they won a World Series that way. So that would happen to the Mets. That'd be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Got to get there first, but
Yeah.
it starts with with all the talk of the Mets not hitting last year. What did them in? What did them in the end? It was the starting pitching, right? They couldn't get more than 4 or 5 innings out of their starters, down the stretch of the year, and they're going to have to improve. They're going to need more innings out of the front 5 or 6 than they were getting. And to your point with like Schilling and Johnson, I mean, if they can get to a short series in October, I mean, it's a winning combination. Look at Scherzer and Strasburg, right? In 2019, they won that World Series because those two pitched 4 of the however many games they were, and they were dominant. So I mean, that's it. Like in the World Series, in the postseason, you have to expect you're going to be playing low scoring games because you're going to be facing quality pitching. Even with the Mets having DeGrom and Scherzer now, there are look, the Dodgers are still a formidable opponent with their starting pitching. Assuming, let's say, Kershaw stays, you have Kershaw and Buehler 1 and 2. That's tough to beat,
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see what Clayton Kershaw does. I find it a little interesting that the Dodgers haven't worked hard to retain him, but we'll see. I mean, it's the same thing with the Braves and Freddie Freeman. I mean, what's going on? But um, it's the combo, the 1-2 punch is going to be a formidable force in the National League all year. I mean, it's just it's nice to know that it's unlikely they're going to have any prolonged losing streaks,
Yeah.
because of that combination. And if you can get Carlos Carrasco, back to somewhere in between last year and the year before, and Taijuan Walker, you don't need him pitching to a 2.50 ERA, but you certainly need better than the 7.13 ERA he posted in the second half. You can get somewhere in between there. I mean, the pitching staff is right where you need it to be. I think they need one more, but it's hard to complain with. I mean, Scherzer just changes everything, changes the calculus entirely.
Yeah, he does. I have two things left I want to get to. One is the manager situation. We're talking like in the middle of the week here that they're doing interviews. Buck Showalter's probably talking today. Sounds like he's the favorite right now. Would he be your top choice for the job here, or do you have somebody else you prefer off the list they have?
Yeah, I think I think they're interviewing a lot of quality people. And even some of the people have been floated out there, like Bruce Bochy. It's not clear if he'd come out of retirement, but I just have I get the feeling if he showed any interest, they'd say, "What time are you available for a Zoom call?"
Right.
How can they, that's my impression. Um, I like Buck Showalter. I think he's a perfect fit for what they need right now. I also like Bob Guerin. I mean, I got to know Bob Guerin when he was with the Mets. He's one of the smartest baseball people I came to know. He's very analytical. He was that important crutch for Terry Collins, and I think the Met, when he left for LA, and he left for good reasons, mind you, but when he left for LA, I think the Mets suffered. And I think you could see it in the performance of Terry Collins, and in turn, the performance of the team. Um, so I like that he is rumored to be involved in these interviews. Um, I, it, Brad Osmus struggled with the Angels. But again, I think you have to take what happens in Anaheim with a grain of salt because of the ownership situation there. That's why we say that I said that about Billy Eppler. I mean, you have to discount it to a degree. I mean, he is accountable. They are accountable for their performance, but I think there's a lot built into it. With the ownership, reportedly meddling, in both of their situations, which impacted their ability to win. Um, but yeah, I mean, I do think right now, someone like Buck Showalter, Bruce Bochy, fit the agenda for them right now. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. I mean, one of the concerns I have about Showalter is, you know, how much does he want the job? I think, if he really wants it, he probably has a leg up over other people because, like I said, he checks the boxes, and you have, Scherzer endorsing him as well. So that helps too. When like your most expensive pitcher says, "Yeah, I want to play for the guy," like that probably helps him in the recruiting process. But um, it comes down to how much he wants to do it. I think it's hard for me to say he's going to be a favorite until that he's excited about the job and wants the job. I mean, I don't think interviewing, there are plenty of candidates who interview for jobs. Look at the Mets president and GM, roles. They interview and then they ultimately don't want the role. So that remains to be seen. But I think he's the best fit. I don't like to play the favorite game. I'm not rooting for one person or another. Um, it's pretty transactional for me. I look for the best fit, the best, who is the best person, the best personality, who's best suited to handle the media, who's best suited to handle high expectations with the media in New York. Buck Showalter, Bob Guerin, I think, they've proven, they can do it. So, and a lot of people don't know, Bob Guerin, because he was a quiet presence, but he was very, very well respected. And the players missed him, they missed him when he left. And he's been well regarded in LA too. He's obviously, he's been in the postseason every year since 2015, won one world championship, 3 or 4 pennants, and he's involved in that. Like he's an important piece to that. And that can't be discounted. So we'll see. Showalter is, his resume speaks for himself too. I don't think he's enjoyed a lot of postseason success, but I think that's a product of some of the rosters he's had at times. So, but everybody loves Showalter. So, and I've been a fan of his too ever since his Yankee days. So, I think he's a good fit.
Yeah, I think so too. I think interesting press conference, whenever this happens, he certainly can't talk about any active players. That's certainly a weird one to listen to.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be a tough. I mean that's just something they have to they have to maneuver and navigate. But it's going to be just awkward when they can't talk about individual players. Okay, well, how do you straighten this person out? What do you think about managing Max Scherzer? Like, it's. Hopefully the lockout's over soon, right? And it's not a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of the lockout being over, now it's going to end eventually, and Steve Cohen does have a very public Twitter here, so like if you had a chance to tweet him and say, Steve Cohen, here's what I think we should do the rest of the offseason, what would you tell him?
I would say, Mr. Cohen, can you please go buy 2 relievers, a back end starting pitcher, and Chris Bryant? I think that would really round out the roster. I would think it would solidify the roster, and obviously makes them a lot better. I think there are plenty of relievers. I'm not concerned about what they're going to do in the bullpen. I think Chris Bryant is still up in the air because the payroll is in a place where most teams don't go. But I don't think that would stop him from signing him. I mean, I think if he believes Bryant can be that final piece, he will spend the money on that piece. But yeah, I mean, that's where I tell him to go. I think he knows, I think he knows what the team needs too. So he'd say like, yeah, no kidding, bro. Right. That's what he would tell me.
Yeah, for sure. Michael, thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go,
Sorry.
no problem. Before I let you go, how can people follow on Twitter and keep up with what you're doing over at Just Mess with Rich?
So, I mean, my Twitter handle, as always, is Michael G. Barron. Just Mets is, we're pretty excited to resurrect that brand. That was a project that unfortunately got canceled after the 2015 season. Rich is doing a lot of the, I'm kind of overseeing the project, at the macro level. Rich is really doing a great job, managing, the content and the brand. That Twitter handle is just _Mets. And right now it's just a Substack newsletter, which again, like Rich is doing a great job handling, primarily. Um, and hopefully, when the lockout's over, we'll be able to launch an actual site, which I've teased recently. We have an interesting idea and an interesting concept. Where the idea for the whole project is to give the short attention span fans such as myself, the nuts and bolts for everything they need, like so for instance, where are the Mets in their managerial hiring process, and we'll give you all the bits of information. If you want more, you can click, there's a link to click to read more about the candidates, details on the process, and so on and so forth. And we feel like that's something that people don't have available to them. The newsletter is follows that spirit. How the newsletter fits into the whole brand long term remains to be seen. But for now, Rich is having a good time managing managing that, and I think the content is good. We're getting a lot of positive feedback. We get a whole bunch of new subscribers every day, and so it's fun to see that.
Absolutely, Michael. Thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Anytime. Glad to be on.